Picture the scene. You meet someone, you're at a dinner party full of strangers, you might like some of them, you might dislike a few, and you find yourself in conversation with a stranger. Like all these conversations with strangers, inevitably at some point the conversation will come up. So what do you do? At that point I would say, well, I'm a spoken word educator. I work as a career embedded in a school teaching poetry. And you will normally get reactions that follow along the lines of bemusement. Some people are impressed. Most people are confused. And they will ask you a question saying, that's great and all, but why does a school need a poet? What are you doing? You know, it doesn't help with your exams. It doesn't help with academic progress. Shouldn't we be focusing on literacy? And at the time, I never want to lecture these people. It's not the right time or place. However, this is the right time or place for a lecture. So I do want to lecture you. Why do we need poets in schools? Essentially, Michael Rosen, who is a tutor of mine and one of the most acclaimed poets and authors working in education, he told me about an incident recently. He was going to a school that he'd never been to before, and he was going to the assembly room. He was walking behind two teachers, primary school teachers, and they were discussing his impending visit. One told the other, said, "Who have we got coming in today?" And the other replied, "I don't know, there's some poet." The response was, "Why is there a poet in the school?" To which the reply was, "I'm not sure, but it's very annoying and it's interfering with my literacy hour." Now again, the irony here would be almost comedic if the implications weren't so serious. In our current climate, schools do not associate poetry with literacy because the way that we teach it, it doesn't fit the definition of literacy that the public are told by the media, by the government, by policymakers. Certainly, that is a skills-based literacy. We have something else, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, but it's called emotional literacy. So, David Barton, he wrote a book called Literacy, An Introduction to the Ecology of Written Language. This is kind of the Bible of what we view literacy as. It's given as the gospel text. Now he said in this, in our perception, a good writer is someone who is neat. He sees the view of this deriving from the way we teach literacy in schools. He's talking about skills-based literacy. In skills-based literacy, the focus is not what the students write, but it's how they write it. Did they insert a comma? How many clauses is that sentence? Where's the full stop? No, this is all wrong. I think that we're pushing towards, at the moment, as a society, we're pushing towards a society of cultural measuring and monitoring, and giving a child a number, an arbitrary number, but it's a number that has the power to control your future, and that's a dangerous thought. So, for example, I will be in school, and I'm trying to promote creative writing. And students are thinking, I can't get the spelling. Should I put a comma there? You know, my grammar's all wrong. And it is a stumbling block. And the reason for that is from a young age, children are taught how to think, and they are taught that one type of literacy, which is skills-based literacy, is more important than another type of literacy. And we're going to get to that in a minute. Now, I work in an area of education where the need to question this type of literacy is increasingly prevalent. So my students, as I said, they can't attend mainstream schools. The reason for this, in a societal view, is that they have failed mainstream schools. There is another reason, of course, which is less accommodated by the general public, and that is that mainstream schools have failed the needs of my students. So it's a two-way thing. These students that I have, they're not very good at exams in a traditional sense, but they are excellent writers. And I want to read you an example of what I've gleaned from an exam. So we had an exam today, a mock exam on Macbeth. This is an example from a student, we'll call him Daniel. So he said, "I had admiration towards both characters, Lady Macbeth and Macbeth, until the bit when Macbeth got too big for his shoes. William Shakespeare, hats off to you, or whoever wrote Macbeth. This play shows a lot of courage, bravery and ruthless ambition, which makes the reader want a sequel. I personally want a second book of Macbeth." So this student has chosen not to write in the traditional exam speak. He's not adhering to the restrictions of skills-based literacy. and he's peppered his writing with humor, exclamation marks, personal opinion, and he's really engaging with the text, and he's drawing something from it and investing something of himself with the text. He got an F, and this is the problem. The way that we feel in school is not considered, and it is not considered valuable. It's, as Bethan Marshall, she wrote a book recently called Rethinking the School Curriculum. And she talked about the implications of this. And she says, grammatical rules become societal laws. Any suggestions that the rules might be redefined or abandoned becomes a threat to civil order. So essentially what she's saying, we are thinking in boxes, both in the classroom, but the implications are wider than this. We are then thinking outside of the classroom in the same box. We are measuring, we are monitoring, and our thinking is very restricted. So we are a society that cannot really connect. We're a contactless society these days, very unfeeling, however we can write very neatly, and this is the problem. So where does poetry come in? I would say poetry is the antidote to this numbness. It is the salve for an unfeeling society. It contains another form of literacy, one that we promote, but one that is so undervalued, as Michael Rosen's visit to the school showed. So we call it, and if you wanted to take a buzzword from this lecture and sum it all up in a phrase of what we're about, it's called emotional literacy. So what is emotional literacy? I'm going to share an example of student poetry. We are not invisible. We are not invincible. We are just not made of glass. Now this is a sample of 3 lines of one of my students. Now this student 2 years ago was illiterate. Essentially, she could barely write. Now, in a skills sense of literacy, she has soared academically as well. Poetry can actually do that, by the way. One of the biggest misconceptions is that poetry doesn't help academic progress. Of course it does. If you are engaging with language in literature and discovering a delight in words, naturally you are going to achieve well in English. If you achieve well in English, you're going to want to achieve well in geography and maths, and you have a whole academic improvement. So to these strangers at the dinner tables that say, what you're doing has no bearing on academics. It's a complete mythology that poetry doesn't help that. But anyway, there is something even more important than achieving academically. And that is the sense that this student could really understand herself. She could begin to articulate the way that she was feeling. And she could look internally and think, okay, this is what I feel. But more so than that, she could translate that externally and think, I feel like this, the world is like this is where the two meet, this is where I fit. Now, the ability to position yourself in your universe is emotional literacy, and that is the literacy that is so important. And that is about development as a human being, okay, getting a sense of self. And what is more important in education than that sense of self and self-development? Arguably nothing, certainly for me. But for those policymakers and the people that are, journalists with their journals and people pushing pens in Parliament, they don't value emotional literacy. And that is, it's a sad thing. So I want to talk now about my students who aren't in school. So I was just referring to a student who is still in school. I work in 2 spheres. So I want to talk about the complete works. Now, I work in a charity called the Complete Works, and the majority of our pupils can't attend school. They are really marginalized. Not in the sense that perhaps everyone is marginalized and feels that their voice doesn't count, but this is an exaggerated version. The reason that a lot of these students turn to gangs and they turn to the wrong kind of lifestyle is because they are so disenfranchised. When you own nothing, that lamppost across the street, the fact that you want to see that as yours, that lamppost is everything. You're then going to fight for that lamppost, and all of these little kingdoms that are formed are people protecting a little bit of area when the massive and sad tragic irony is that they own nothing. Nothing that they have is their own. Therefore, this promotes an atmosphere where you want something, you want to grab something, and you want attention. And these students have none of it. So I was faced with the question, okay, and I was speaking to a radio interviewer yesterday about this, and it really annoyed me actually what they said. They said, so all the kids, they get to you and they're completely off the rails, and so why'd you do poetry? Obviously they're off the rails. So first of all, I object to that term. I think we need to really redefine what the rails are. It's not a simple binary case of these kids are off the rails. There's a lot of factors at play here. And secondly, poetry, initially you might think that it has no part to play, but it has a big part to play. These students are constantly listening to rap lyrics, they're listening to hip hop, they're listening to grime. Poetry is embedded in that. And as a hip hop artist, I can see that. despite public opinion. So they're already listening to constant rhymes, they're engaging with language regularly. So the idea is, how can we tap into that? So what I'm doing now, and I'm nearly finished in the process of this, is I'm publishing a book, and it's called I Am Unconditional. And this book is a collection of all the student voices. And I said, sit down, we're going to, over a course of a year, we've been writing towards this. And at no point did I say, you can't write that, you shouldn't write that. What's your nan going to think of that? We never had that discussion, there was no censorship. And what it has done is allowed these students whose voice is constantly muted out by everyone else's, it has allowed them to have an outlet. So it is so important. And I just want to read you an extract of the beginning of our book because it gives you a sense of why we do this as spoken word educators. Who listens to kids, eh? Wrote one student in my year 11 class, halfway through his story. And it is a good question. Who listens to kids? Many of our students feel that they speak at a frequency which simply cannot be dialed by those other than themselves. My inspiration for this project was the number of times I was told, we can't write a book, sir. They don't call me sir. We can't write a book. No one's going to read what we have to write. No one's going to hear what we have to say. This was the inspiration. I wanted to prove these students wrong. Who listens to kids, eh? Wrote one student in my year 11 class, halfway through his story. And it is a good question. Who listens to kids? Many of our students feel that they speak at a frequency which simply cannot be dialed into by those other than themselves. My inspiration for the project was the number of times I was told by my students, no one's going to listen to us. No one will hear us. Who's going to read a book that we write? And I took that as my challenge. I thought, you feel that no one is interested. I can understand why you're given that impression. At no point in your life has anyone shown interest outside of the people that you know. But I think that this book, and I want this book to really change a lot of things. There is a stigma that people who are expelled from school are bad people. They've been expelled because they are bad. This is the first perception that I want to challenge. These are not bad people. No one is born bad. People are shaped to have behavioral problems and difficulties, and everyone is different. So I really want to challenge that stigma, and the best way to do it is through poetry. I think poetry is invaluable in this fight that we have, especially in the current political climate where poetry is going to be even more marginalized by policymakers who creativity and the arts is not a priority for them at all. So I think the fight really is happening now, and it is a very important one. So I want to share you some of these student voices so you can get a sense. Now, when you're listening to this, bear in mind, this is a child that's expelled from school. This is a child that you might think is a bad child. They've not followed the rules. They've made mistakes. So I want you to hear what they have to say. This is by a girl in year 11. My own rights. I feel like they're slipping away. I feel less powerful. I feel like my body has taken over. Weakness has overcome me. But do you know what? You can't take away my imagination. Take away what you want, but my imagination is strong and powerful. My imagination creates my happiness, and that's how it will be. Another example. Light. Light. I would write light on wet concrete and let it set. Light is everywhere. Sunlight, moonlight, torchlight, lamplight, the light in somebody's eyes. It fills every corner and crevice, every deep dark hole. It is beautiful, it is blinding, and it makes you feel whole. It warms you, washes over you, and it makes everything better. You don't have to be in the dark. You don't have to be alone. There's something beautiful about it. No matter what happens, there is always light. There will always be something new. This is a girl that's been expelled for behavior problems in year 11. This final example is a boy in year 10, expelled for again behavior problems. I come from a place where one type succeed. I come from a place where we are told that the rich and the white succeed. Despite that, I will still succeed. I come from a home where dad was never there. I come from a home where there was no love, no care, struggling to pay the bills, let alone rent. I come from a home struggling with debt. I come from the north, where I used to play on the streets. As a kid, I had no worries. But these days, there's so many dangers, constant attack. I'm constantly watching my back. And this is true. These students are growing up around the risk of gangs and violence. And just because you are involved in a gang, again, does not mean that you are some kind of villain and criminal that has chosen this. Often it's not a conscious choice. It is the only thing that is available. But through poetry, there is an outlet. And I really want to leave you with the last example of student work, and it's by a student called Isaiah, and it's about this issue. This gang stuff has got so predictable. They're all the same, none of them are original. This is real life I'm writing, it's far from fictional. Just remember that no one's invincible. To my family, friends, and all those I know, my love for you is unconditional. Now, unconditional is the title of our book, and Isaiah's prophetic words referring to the fact that no one is invincible and the dangers of gang life, it really sticks with you, especially with the news that Isaiah was knifed to death a few weeks ago. And it is such a poignant example of these students who have a voice, but sometimes it's not enough. And poetry can't save the world. And as much as we try and promote, emotional literacy, and we want to say poetry can help these children, and it's not always the case. There has to be help. There has to be help from governments, there has to be help from councils, there has to be help from communities, and we are just one arm in this whole fight. But we are a very valuable arm, and poetry has a part to play, and I hope that for every Isaiah there will be hundreds and thousands of other students across the nation that can be helped, and poetry will allow a way out. So, I want to finish with my conclusion now. For those that aren't well versed in poetry, for those who find rhyme but no reason to it, I want to hold up the examples that I've shown you. Okay, I want you to be that person at the dinner table that never got that lecture, and I want you to think, okay, I see that now. Because there is so much misconception. Public perception is so misguided in a lot of cases about what poetry can do. It is not dead white men in classic books, although that is part of it. Poetry is much more, okay? It is universal. It transcends boundary. It transcends every difference that we might perceive ourselves to have. And that is why we need it, okay? Poetry is relevant, and it will always be relevant. And that's why, I'm sitting here today, and I want to push that image, and I want you to take that away from this. Poetry can help this society, and we are a society in need. I remember I asked the Year 7 class, who are still in school, and I said, what is poetry? And we got a range of different answers. One student said, poetry gives my brain legs so it can run away. And again, all of them as a class, they chanted one mantra, and that is, poetry is life. And for them, I guess it is now. It's all of their experiences balled up into one and thrown out there to see what kind of ripples it can make. And we will see. I guess that's what I want to finish on. Emotional literacy, it has a part to play. And I want to be at the front of that. And I want to be on the front line so that in 20 years from now, if I have a son and I have a daughter and they're in school, I want them to be in a lesson with a poet. I want this poet to be embedded in the school. I want every school to have a poet, and I want a nation or an international community where poets are valued in schools. And I want my son or daughter, if I have one, to go into class and see on the board, emotional literacy. How do you feel? And until that day happens, then my job's not done. Thank you. Okay then, poetry community. I'm going to set you some homework now, but it's going to be quite open-ended. Now, there's a quote that I really enjoy. It's from a woman called Karen Blixen. I don't know her, but I believe in the power of her words. She said, write a little every day, without hope, without despair. I want you to remember that, because the idea is, if you don't have a journal, you don't have a notebook, you don't have a, whatever, get one. And then you need to start writing. Don't worry about the quality of what you're writing. Don't worry what you're writing. Don't worry when or how you're writing, but start writing. And then develop. Constantly interact with your universe. Think, where do I position myself in relation to this? How does this make me feel? How does that make me feel? How do I feel? How do you feel? Write. The more that you write, the more you can shape, the more you can edit. Do this, hone your craft, okay? And you will start understanding yourself differently. You will start understanding the world differently. And you're a poet. My name's Christian Foley, and this poem is called Maths 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Why 2, 3, 4? Why do we study maths, sir? He knew too much of division. Now he saw division as two figures, either side of a table in prison, plus equals. Equals equaled a letterbox, beneath which his dad's letters rot. Why do we study maths, sir? He found few pluses to addition, Plus, he recognized plus from the collision when the ambulance screamed that day to carry his brother away. Why do we study maths, sir? He too knew much of subtraction. Subtraction, that was a knife-nick scar, while fractions were split families or crossed hearts or whole bodies cut in half. Why do we study maths, sir? It is for multiplication, please. Take this as a sign that I need you to see, to reread and break all of your brackets free. You are 99 times the boy the world says you will be.